What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back in the video. It's Monday, so time to go over the week 16 waiver wire. We actually do have a few viable options this week, a few more than last week, but even with that, if you've made it this far, your team's probably pretty solid. You probably only need like tight end, quarterback, defense streaming options. You're probably not streaming running back, wide receiver, but a few good options, at least at the running back position. There's really nothing that we don't know at wide receiver, but a few this week are running back. So top four, I would say, are Tyler Algier, Zach Moss, Deion Jackson, and Chuba Hubbard. That's currently my order of preference. I really think it's a tie between Moss and Deion Jackson. And I honestly think you could lean towards Jackson if you think that the Colts get into like a trailing game script. Jackson more likely to do the pass catching back, but we'll go over those two after we do Algier. But I think Algier is first for me. We saw Huntley go down pretty early. I believe it was the first quarter. Looks like a pretty bad ankle injury. I don't think he's going to play the rest of the season. So rest of the year should be like a 50-50 split between Algier and Cordero Patterson. Algier has his best game of the season. 17 carries, I believe like a 1-yard catch or something like that. Just the one target. It was really on the ground. He looked fantastic. 17 for 139 and a score. And that was in a game where they're trailing. We know the Falcons do not care if they're losing the game. They're going to continue running it like until they're down 4 scores with 5 minutes left. They're not going to throw the football. So we can say with a very high degree of confidence that Tyler Algier is going to have 15 to 18 touches over the next 2 weeks, like obviously in each game. That makes him, absolutely viable to start. It's unfortunate that, 95% of those touches are going to come on the ground. So you're not baking in those receptions for like added full PPR, half PPR value. But, anyone getting that level of work on an offense that, like, their offensive line has been really, really good at run blocking. Like, they're running it so much because when they get into like 3rd and 4, 3rd and 5, most teams have to throw it. But the Falcons have been successful running the ball. And so there's just so many situations where we're like, well, we don't trust our quarterback. We have one good pass catching weapon. Like, it does make sense, at least, that they're running the ball so much. So he's going to be like a really good option. I would say in most competitive leagues, he probably already is rostered. But for many of you, especially in like 10 or less competitive 12-team leagues, definitely could be there. Definitely worth adding. I think he's number one. Then, like I said before, I think then it's Moss and Deion Jackson. My only hesitation with them is the game script. So we saw Jonathan Taylor go down, in his like second touch. I think it's highly unlikely that he returns at any point this season. It would make no sense for them to rush him back. It's another ankle sprain. Like, just get him good to go for next season. I don't think he's going to play again this year. So we look at the game that happened, and they miraculously get up, 36-0, and then they go into clock killing mode for 2.5 quarters, which is obviously too much, especially when you're not a good offense, and so most of the time, if you're running the ball, you're probably going 3, 4, 5 plays and out, giving it back to an explosive offense. Kind of makes sense that the Vikings came back. But you look at that, and you're like, okay, that's not going to happen again. Like, the Colts are not getting up 36-0 another game this season. They might not even be winning at any point again this season, and they're definitely not winning by that much. And so we see Moss get 24 carries and 1 target, Deion Jackson get 13 carries and a target, and you're like, okay, well, if that holds, obviously you're starting Moss and you're saying Deion Jackson's viable because he's going to be more the pass catching back. And so you look at that and you're like, oh wow, we really want to go after them. And it's not that they're like, not going to be a run first team. Like, they're going to be a run first team as long as Jeff Saturday is the coach. That's just going to happen. But let's be honest, they're going to be underdogs against the Chargers. They're probably going to fall behind. And so usage is not locked in with these two. And then you consider, we see this a lot where a starter goes down and like maybe the backup of the next 2 players get a lot of usage. And we think, oh, that'll happen again next week. But they activated 3 running backs last week. Why wouldn't they do so again the next week? And so instead of having just these 2, you might have 3 running backs splitting the usage on an offense that, let's be honest, Colts not a good team. That's probably going to be trailing. And so we can have the receptions, but only for one of the 3 at a time. And so, yeah, 20 to 23 touches just opened up, But if it's split amongst 3 running backs, that's not fantastic. So that's why I have them behind Algier. I think they're number 2 and number 3 because we're at week 16. Like, there aren't that many amazing options, but I'm a little hesitant with both of them because I really just don't think they're going to be all that fantastic moving forward, even in a really good matchup against the Chargers. Then after them, number 4, Chuba Hubbard. Foreman's been like up and down. I don't think the roles have really changed. Like, obviously, Foreman is very attached to game script. When the Panthers are winning, they're just going to run the ball a ton. Foreman's going to be the early down back. When he's finding success, it just makes sense that he gets 7 touches. And then we have a game like last week where they're not successful on the ground. When they then fall behind, it's just not going to be a Foreman game. It's going to be more a Chuba game. So I think that continues, but it's worth noting that Foreman hasn't been like amazing. His really good games come when he has like 30 carries. In terms of like efficiency, he hasn't been that fantastic. Last 4 weeks, he's had 3.6 yards per carry or less in 3 of 4. He's got -1 receiving yards since week 7, so he's not used through the air. And so Chuba looks better recently. He's the one that's getting involvement in the passing attack. And when we look at the matchup this week against the Lions, well, I'm thinking the Lions are probably going to win, probably going to be playing from ahead. We know the Lions defense has been one of the best in terms of like rush defense in the league. And so it's pretty likely Foreman's not going to have a good game on the ground. And so if you need someone, Chuba's on free agency. Can he rack up 3, 4, maybe 5 receptions if they really pull ahead, like the Lions pull ahead, and then adds a little bit on the ground? Maybe. And so definitely not as good of an option as the first 3, but viable nonetheless. Beyond those running backs, you're basically just looking at who is someone I could add, put on my bench if I happen to advance into the finals and there's an injury, there's a role change, something like that, I could benefit. I would say you're looking at Gus Edwards, James Cook, Khalil Herbert, Jordan Mason, and then Jalen Warren. The one that could be different, and we still don't know enough yet, is JaMycal Hasty. So Etienne suffers the ankle injury late in the game. He does play, but as we've talked about plenty, that happens sometimes where someone gets an ankle injury. There's a ton of adrenaline pumping through them. Like, it was a very close game, a very important game. Etienne wants to play in that game, and so he's out there. But then you have, the next few days, the ankle swells up, and they're like, oh, yeah, not fantastic to play. Now, these are must-win games for the Jaguars. They need to continue winning. And so if he can play at all, I think he's going to be out there. But there's at least a possibility that Etienne misses the next game, in which case JaMycal Hasty is a solid option because, like, if you just have that spot, why not take a shot? If it happens that Etienne plays, cool. Either cut Hasty, keep him on the bench in case he like re-aggravates the injury, something like that. But it's just worth adding because, like, what are you doing with your bench right now? If you've got a wide receiver that's like a wide receiver 6 or 7, that there's no circumstance you're ever playing them, add that for like extra defense spots, extra tight end streamers, or someone like Hasty who there's a chance he may be better. But not really too much beyond these guys for running back. At wide receiver, there is pretty much nothing, especially if we're talking about people in the semifinals at this point for fantasy. You probably have decent wide receivers. You've figured it out at this point. You're not looking to the waiver wire. Top option is probably Chris Moore. But as you saw last week, like, that was a game where if you told me going into the week that against the Chiefs, a really good matchup for wide receivers, especially from the slot where he plays mostly, that he was going to like lead the team in targets by mile, lead the team in receiving. They were going to take Kansas City to overtime, ultimately lose, but like lose in overtime. I would have taken the over on 6.2 half PPR points. Like, I would have taken the over, and I would have put a lot of money on that over. So just because he's the number 1 receiver, just because he might have good matchups, like, it really doesn't matter sometimes. Like, this is the Houston Texans. He's still Chris Moore. He had 9 targets in a good spot in a game that went to overtime against a team they should have gotten crushed by, and he had 6.2 half PPR points. So again, probably going to get around 10 targets. He's going to play the Titans. Great matchup. But he's Chris Moore. Like, he's still not going to be overly efficient. Behind him, you can look at Treylon Burks if he's back this week. You can look at Elijah Moore. You can look at Jahan Dotson at the really good game on Monday night. But it goes back to what I said before. You're probably not using them unless you're in deeper formats. And the same thing with everyone else, like Osborne. Some people are going to flock to, but it's like, how do you trust that? I mean, he had what, single-digit target share before last week. He explodes, but like you can't expect that to keep happening. Rashid Shaheed, interesting option, getting more and more playing time. Probably the number 2 now, behind or ahead of Landry, behind Olave. But do you need that? Maybe as your wide receiver 3, maybe as your second flex, but like you probably don't need that. Russell Gage, 2 touchdowns, but let's be honest, he's the number 3 on that offense. Terrace Marshall, Darius Slayton, like all these guys are fine, but unless you're in a 14 or 16 team league, you just don't need to be playing them right now. After that, we'll look at streaming options this week. Tight end, we'll start off with. 3 options are Chig Okonkwo, guy we've talked about for the past month, Juwan Johnson, and then Taysom Hill. Chig has been honestly the number 1. Obviously, Henry's number 1 option in the offense, but number 1 in the passing game for the Titans for the past few weeks. As we talked about, part of that is to do with Treylon Burks being injured. Like, Burks is also someone that wants to scheme like looks to, and when he's gone, a lot of looks are going to be schemed to Chig every single week. I think he may carry this week. Like, they're clearly trying to get him touches, get involved in the offense, and they know. I mean, let's be honest, they don't have that many playmakers. Like, Robert Woods hasn't been fantastic. Westbrook-Ikine is just fine. Austin Hooper is just fine. Like, no one's explosive. It's like they want to get him the ball because he's like their best player and they need to be winning right now. Over the last 4 weeks, the top 3 tight ends in fantasy are Evan Ingram 1, Travis Kelce 2, and Chig, number 3. He's the 3rd tight end over the last month. And so if he's on free agency, absolutely. Against the Texans this coming week, they're not going to get anything to wide receivers. Obviously, Henry has like 4 consecutive 200-yard multi-touchdown games against the Texans right now, so he's probably going off. But let's be honest, they can't do wide receivers, so when they throw it, it's going to be to Okonkwo. After that, Juwan Johnson, I mean, he was phenomenal, and it was on like such limited touches. I mean, he came back from injury, didn't get the full snap share, just happens sometimes coming back from injury. I'd expect that to go higher next week. He only played 28 snaps, only ran 13 routes, but I mean, the target share, 6 targets on 13 routes, managed to catch 4 of them for 67 yards and 2 touchdowns, gives him 7 touchdowns in his last 7 games. He's a tight end 5 since week 7, so another tight end. If he's out there, you can add him and start him. And if you can't get those 2, Taysom Hill, always an option. Believe it or not, he's a tight end 6 on the season. Floor is remarkably low, but let's be honest, every tight end not named Travis Kelce has a floor of 0. And so if you're looking for someone who can go out there and have a ceiling, you know he could get 5 carries for 10 yards, no receptions, no pass attempts. That can happen for Taysom Hill. But like I said, every single tight end not named Kelce could score 0. And so if you want someone who has a ceiling of 20, like absolutely has a ceiling of 20 points, that's Taysom Hill. And we haven't even seen the design runs in like the red zone recently, but like they're going to happen. And so he's not going to hit for like a 70-yard touchdown every game, but he's got upside for sure. So if you want someone like that, especially if you're an underdog, go for him. At quarterback, you got like 3 options, not a super appealing. Honestly, last week wasn't very appealing for streaming options. This week, not fantastic, but Russell Wilson should return this week. He's going to match up at the Rams and then at the Chiefs. I would say that at the Rams in week 16, probably don't want to use them, but if you want to stash someone for week 17, I do think Wilson has upside at the Chiefs. You have to think that's going to be a game where, you know, he's probably going to want to play well in the final game of the season. We know the Chiefs are a great matchup for opposing quarterbacks, so that one's a good spot there. But again, you don't want to use them in week 16. If you're looking for just this week, the hope is that Mike White is cleared to play, but let's be honest, they play on Thursday, and it's probably not enough time for him to get cleared. If he is cleared, I'll definitely want to stream Mike White, but the odds are he's not going to be, and so you can play against the Jaguars. Zach Wilson, they're in must-win mode. The Jaguars are in must-win mode. Like, the Jaguars are a great matchup for quarterbacks. So he's an option. If that made your ears bleed, then you could go to Brock Purdy also. I'm a little bit concerned with Purdy just because, like, he's looked great. And he's got a bunch of playmakers around him. So, like, he doesn't need to be an actually, like, amazing quarterback. Just get the ball to, like, the really good players on your team, and they'll be fantastic after the catch. The one thing that concerns me is we know the volume is low. It's never going to be high for him. And so when he's not throwing for multiple touchdowns, it's not going to be great. He scored, 16.5 this week, which is totally fine from a streaming option. But, it takes multiple touchdowns. It takes, like a 60-yard touchdown to Travis Kelce. It takes these plays. And so what happens if they still score, 24, 27 points, but McCaffrey runs in 2 touchdowns? Well, now Purdy might only have 10. So the floor is very, very low for him. But if you need someone, it's a great offense. And so he's going to get the ball to playmakers. He's looked solid. He's not a bad option. Then finally, defense streaming options. I think the top option is the Chargers at the Colts. Yes, I know the Colts just scored 1 billion points, but that was very, very fluky. Overall, this is a game with high sack potential, high turnover potential. Whenever you're playing against Matt Ryan, you've got the potential for defensive touchdowns as well. Chargers have played a lot better recently, so I think they're the number one option, at least from amongst defenses that are available. There's some better options, but they're 90% owned. You can't really go to them. Behind them, Titans. That's going to be one I'm going to ask about a lot this week, but Titans are at home against the Texans. I know that Dallas was very highly owned. Kansas City, very highly owned. Last week, everyone added them to stream against the Texans. And then back-to-back weeks, the Texans have well outperformed what we were expecting them to do. Again, they took Kansas City to overtime. They almost beat the Cowboys. They've been playing really well, and so I understand the hesitancy. If you don't want to play the Titans, you think that the Texans are surging right now, you just don't want to do it. I get that. I still think it's a good spot at home. The Titans need to win this game. Derrick Henry is going to have a monster game. They're probably going to be playing with the lead, probably going to limit the scoring of the Texans, but again, I understand if you don't want to go there. If you can't go to those two, I would say the Lions at the Panthers. Probably not rostered. I don't think many people have the Lions rostered right now. But the Panthers offense is really their ground game. That's all they have. They have to produce with the running backs. If they don't, they're not going to score very many points. And so when you look at the matchup against the Lions, that's a terrible matchup for them. The odds are the Panthers are going to get shut down on the ground. And when they lean towards the air, that they're going to be efficient on average, but they're just not a good passing attack and they don't want to throw it. And so the odds are they try and stick with the run until the Lions really pull ahead. And then when they drop back, they really only have DJ Moore, and then I guess Terrace Marshall's okay, but they don't have that much talent in the receiving game. And so I definitely think that the Lions can rack up a few sacks, cause a few turnovers. It'll kind of depend on the Lions offense being successful, because if they're not, then the Panthers are probably just going to run the ball, just going to be hey, well, we're not losing by too much right now, and we don't really want to throw it, so we're going to continue running it. But I think the odds are that the Lions can be successful in defense, and so I would stream them. And then if somehow they're also gone, you can look to the Rams. They're at home versus the Broncos. I know I trash on the Rams offense, but their defense is still really good, and the Broncos offense is not. So I don't even care whether it's Ripien, whether it's Wilson. I don't care who the quarterback is. The Broncos offense has not been good. Rams at home. That's a perfectly fine defense to stream. So that's how the waiver wire is looking this week. Remember, the early bird special is live on the website. I'm not sure when it's going to end, but it's definitely not going to last into 2023. So if you want the biggest discount there will be for 2023 packages, sign up on the website now with the promo code listed on the site. I'll be back Thursday to go over this week's starts and sits, then Friday to go over my favorite plays of the week. That, my friends, is in this one. Hope you all did enjoy. If you did, how about hitting the like button? How about subscribing to the channel if you're new here? Thanks for watching.